Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host FAIZA NAQVI with a prayer. May Allah keep you all safe, healthy and blessed. May Allah bring peace and justice on this earth and help us build that environment that could bring that justice and peace on this in this world, inshallah. Ameen. Today the topic we are about to discuss is relating to Gaza and especially ongoing situation in Rafah, and due to that situation, there is a tension going on between US and Israel. So how they are coping up with that, and the appearance of Yahya Sanwar, who was supposed to be a dead man walking, and suddenly he appeared as well, and now they are trying to trace him as well. So it is kind of another failure from the perspective of the Israel who are fighting against Hamas. So how the situation is going on in Rafah, and how is the situation going on in these places, as well as the situation around the globe. We'll try to a little bit look at that. As we can see that other day, like in last week, you can say, Senator Bernie Sanders did comment in some assembly or something like that, and he said that the people of America, all the Democratic parties, even they are related to progressive, independents, or conservative, or whoever are there. So all the parties want a ceasefire, and they are sick of this situation which is going on in Gaza. And this is something he was discussing from the polls he has got from the people around in America. So there's a lot of pressure, and we can also see that America also has stopped weapon shipment to the Israel just because of the attacks in Rafah and the tension regarding that. So we will try to understand what's going on in this situation. What is the US policy at the moment? Why the ceasefire deal could not why it has gone to an end, you can say. So we will discuss in little bit of depth with our prestigious guest. I have with us Sister Batool Subeiti, and she is a wonderful writer, activist, and commentator, and she has joined us today in the show. And we do have Sister Sakina, who is producer and journalist and author, and at the moment also observing all the encampments going on around the UK, and looking at the situation in a deeper context. Thank you so much for joining in the show. I'm really honored to have you both on the show. Thanks a lot for that. Sister Batool, first of all, how do you see the situation going on, especially between Israel and America? Because from very initial address we have seen from Hassan Nasrallah, he said they should settle between they should discuss the matter between them, US and Israel. So from his first address, it was something coming up like that, and now that situation looks like it has come now as well. So how do you see the policy of United States of America, as there are elections going on as well? So how do you see this situation, and how do you see the situation in Rafah, because they have attacked over there as well, and millions of people are displaced and are in threat of dying, and obviously facing lots of painful situation which we can't even imagine while sitting here. So what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, it's great questions, and thank you for having me. The first point to make is that the Israeli occupation entity is ultimately bound by the supreme American interests. So the fact that this war is still continuing tells us that America is not concerned so much about the stopping the continuation of the war per se, as much as it's concerned with facilitating the conditions for the political settlement that it seeks to impose. Steps which have included, the building of the pier port in Gaza, the marine port, facilitating the Palestinian Authority's control over Gaza, of course not with Mahmoud Abbas, but with a new face, because new policies cannot continue based on, old faces. For example, we've seen the pressuring of Saudi Arabia into normalizing relations with the Israeli occupation entity through America pursuing a security pact with Saudi in return. So America at this point is not imposing a ceasefire on the Israeli occupation entity, despite the fact that it very much agreed with the last proposal of the ceasefire that was put on the table, which the Gazan resistance also agreed to. So facilitating the conditions for a political settlement is the priority for America. Of course, that also includes the objective of weakening the Gazan resistance, which the Israeli occupation entity has completely failed to achieve militarily. So if we want to talk about the American strategy for the war on Gaza, it has in general been to bring the mass military campaign to a halt. Within this context, we need to see the comments from Joe Biden in terms of, limiting the amount of weaponry that's sent to the Israeli occupation entity, because they've seen that it's ultimately failed. The only thing that has brought about is the killing of mass civilian casualties, and that has ultimately backfired on American interests. Because the world has woken up in a way that is unprecedented and never seen before. The worldwide mass consciousness has awoken as a result of that. So the American strategy that it is pursuing is the political settlement. From America's perspective, the Israeli occupation entity has to instead turn towards limited security operations to weaken the Gazan resistance. And they see through this also the strengthening of their supported group, which is the Palestinian Authority, who they wish to establish security control over Gaza. So the idea is that, through the interests of the people of Gaza, from desperate aid to reconstruction, to income, to jobs, America wishes for the friendly entities, including the normalizing countries such as UAE, Egypt, and Jordan, to facilitate that mission. And through that, they hope to overtake the Gazan resistance, because ultimately the military strategy on the ground has failed. So it's true that America, if other than Netanyahu was in power, so for example, if the head of the opposition, Yair Lapid, was in power, or if Benny Gantz, who is the preferred, candidate from American standards, was in power, yes, it is likely that a ceasefire agreement would have already likely been achieved. But it's also important to state that America is not seeking a permanent ceasefire. And that was the latest round of deals that was put on the table, which the Gazan resistance also accepted. Because the goal from America is to advance the political solution, as we've been mentioning. And this requires the Gazan resistance to constantly be under blackmail. So at any moment, in any time, they can launch a limited security operation. And so for that reason, America does not want a permanent ceasefire. So it can therefore be said on that basis that the continuation of the war is an indication of America's acceptance of that. But ultimately, what constitutes a red line for America cannot be transgressed by the Israeli occupation entities. We have to understand that Israel is bound by the supreme American interests. It's bound by the dictates. It's bound by the red lines of America. So, for example, an example of where we witnessed this during this war was the retaliatory strikes from the Israeli occupation entity onto Iran based on Iran's retaliatory strikes. So America forced Israel to respond in a way that was very, very mild to the slap on the face that Iran retaliated when they targeted those areas in Esfahan with those really small drones. And that is because America does not seek escalation. The Israeli occupation entity seeks escalation, but America put them in their place and said, no, you cannot retaliate in a way that will cause Iran to retaliate further and expand the war. So that's an example of a red line. Rafah is also an example of another red line for the America. It's a red line for the Israeli occupation entity to carry out a mass assault on Rafah. Therefore, as a result of that, it is likely that Rafah's invasion will be limited if it does go ahead. That is because America does not want it. Why does America not want it? Because America sees it as futile. The rest of the other ground invasions haven't worked. If we're talking about, for example, the Jabalia camp, the Israeli occupation entity claimed, a few months into the war that it had completely dismantled the resistance infrastructure in Jabalia. But now we see that the occupation entity is back in northern Gaza. Why? Because ultimately they have failed to dismantle their resistance and they're launching rockets again into the heart of the occupation entity. So, it's not worked. Ground invading hasn't worked. America understands this. America doesn't want to aggravate the situation further globally as well. And so for that reason, it is not on par with the occupation entity regarding its strategy for Rafah.
Thank you, Sister Batool. So, what are your thoughts, Sister Sakina? How do you see what Sister Batool has like shared the view regarding the U.S. policy on the Gaza situation? Because they are trying to control Israel, but it looks like somehow Israel wants freedom of doing whatever it wants. And whatever it wants to achieve, and obviously everyone knows from even the past records and past statements they have been delivering. I mean, especially the people, like leadership of Israel, has always been like behind people of Palestine, and they really wanted all of them to go somewhere else or wipe them out from that land or whatever. So what are your thoughts on that, and how do you see at the moment this awakening, awakening we are like seeing around us, especially in the different cities of United States and even in the UK and around the globe, where young children, parents, and especially the students of the universities are like standing in favor of the people of Gaza and their cause, and they are trying to understand it, and everyone is like holding this flag of free Palestine and occupation should go to an end. How do you see how much these encampments are achieving so far? Do you see any achievement they have had up till now? Because you have discussed in our last show, there were some objectives they have shared. So, how much success do you think they have got out of that? And how do you see overall situation in Rafah and Gaza?
Thank you. So I think on the issue of America, I differ a little bit with Sister Batool's analysis. So I personally don't think that there is any issue of a red line for America, because I don't believe that there is any tension between America and Israel. I think they are working hand in glove. Every decision that is being made is actually being made together. So Israel and America are actually one and the same. And this is because, as you may know, that the America, the ruling class of Americans are dictated by the Israeli lobby. I mean, they are the ones who really run the White House. And so I don't really believe, in terms of, for example, a stop to arms, this is just a facade. There has been enough of arms already sent before this announcement was made. So they already have sent more than enough of arms if the ground invasion is to happen, and if they wanted to finish Rafah, that there is enough arms already that exists there, that was given by the Americans. Why then is America talking of red lines and trying to look like they are trying to rein in Israel? This is simply because this is an election year. It is all electioneering. So we know that the people, as you mentioned, the students, a huge population in America, in the West generally, but specifically in the United States, people have really awakened, and there is no support for this war of Gaza. Therefore, Biden knows that he will lose the elections if he is not seen to be making any kind of an effort to bring in the ceasefire. So all these talks about, the red lines. I mean, if there were red lines, what? After how many? Over 40,000 people, children, hospitals have been bombed. Were those not the time for you to bring in the red lines? What does the red line mean now? As we speak, we're hearing that 80% of hospitals in Rafah are out of service now. The food trucks, the aid that was going in, the little bit of it is being attacked, and the IDF, IOF soldiers are watching the settlers destroying this aid. Already, the people are being moved. There is attacks in the central Gaza. People move to south. There's attacks over there. So really, I mean, where is the red line you're talking about? So in my view, really, I don't think that there is anything as such. I think this is just all politics because they are worried about losing the election. And also, the public opinion globally has changed. So they want to be seen to be doing something. Also, the European, the head of the European Union, I mean, Borrell, he mentioned today that he sees a lethargy of Americans in trying to do anything about ceasefire. So they've been urging, the European countries are urging for a two-state solution, which a two-state solution, in my view, is not the way forward. But anyhow, even if you were to consider a two-state solution, then they are saying Americans are really, not really serious about this. They have a lethargy, and this feeds into the fact that they really are not serious. The talk of lead line is just real talk. When it comes now to the uprising of the students and how much change there is, it's a huge change, amazingly big change. I don't think there is ever been. I mean, the only parallel I can think about is what happened in South Africa when the world, was woken up to this apartheid over there. And so I just think we are seeing something very similar. Student movements have brought down, have closed wars. This happened in Vietnam, for example. It was the student uprising that saw the end to the war in Vietnam. Again, in South Africa, students have played a key role. So I think it's a very significant moment. And what is really interesting, and I cover these issues often, I go to the protests, the processions. When processions started initially post October 7th, at least half of the congregations, people used to be Muslims. You could visibly see that. Today, if you go to any of these protests and the student encampments that I've been, attending, you will hardly see maybe 10 to 20% of Muslims. This is now being led by non-Muslims and predominantly by students who are Jews and do not want these atrocities being done in their name, because we know very well that Judaism is not equal to Zionism. And, having suffered, their forefathers having suffered Holocaust, they don't want to be part of this another Holocaust, another live genocide that we are watching. So I think that this really is a momentous. I mean, on one hand, yes, when you look at what is happening in Rafah, it is very, very sad. It tugs at our hearts. We see a human misery that probably the world has never seen live before. But I think there is a lot of positivity to take away from this. If you compare this to the story of Imam Hussein, for example, I think when the tragedy of Karbala was happening, you had to have a vision to think that something positive will come out of that. How would you imagine in that circumstances that the world would change? That forever there was a beauty that only Sayyida Zainab could see, that no one else could see at that time. So I think this beauty is also there today. Through the bloodshed and the pain, the beauty is that they have awakened the world. The world was asleep. The world did not know how we were all being played by this 2% or 1% of the world leaders, the Zionism taking root around the world in different formats. So the fact that this has awakened everybody, not just Muslims, but people across all religions and faiths and, nationalities, I think this is very much the beauty that Sayyida Zainab used to talk about.
Thank you so much, Sister. Sister Batul, what are your thoughts? What Sister Sakina has mentioned, if you want to add anything or you want to enhance anything in that. And what do you think, what was the reason behind the ceasefire agreement couldn't be successful and Netanyahu refused it? Obviously, apparently it looks like they would, they might, they can, because the people in the Israel also want ceasefire, because especially the people and the families whose family members are hostages with Hamas. So how do you see this failure of this truce between Hamas and Israel? So why it has not come to a conclusion, positive conclusion?
Oh, absolutely. So this war, I think, until now has shown us that the power of the Israeli occupation entity is not intrinsic. It cannot, for example, survive without the extent and the heaviness of the American weaponry that is given to them. This war revealed the extent to which the Israeli occupation entity is unable to, quote unquote, defend itself alone. So what we're ultimately witnessing, or what we've witnessed throughout these 7 months, is America managing this battle on behalf of the Israeli occupation entity. on October, right from the onset, we saw how it quickly sent its warships and its Delta forces into the region because of the Israeli occupation entity's obvious weakness. So it wasn't just a show of alliance. It was to fill that vacuum and that void that was created. Ultimately, October the 7th shattered that notion that we're dealing with this strong, inherent, invincible army. But despite the fact that America quickly jumped in to save the Israeli occupation entity, they've also made it very clear that they're not seeking expansion of this confrontation into a comprehensive war. They are unwilling to fight the battle for a collapsing entity as they see it. So ultimately, when we talk about red lines, a clear example of a red line for America is expansion of the war fronts. It cannot afford to go into war regionally with, forget just looking at Gaza, the Israeli occupation entity cannot defeat the Gazan resistance. Imagine fighting with its source, right? The American bases in the region wouldn't survive if this turned into a regional war. The whole creation of the Israeli occupation entity is to secure the imperialist presence in this region of strategic importance. So what happens when the Israeli occupation entity goes from protecting Western interests to being in need of protection? What happens to when it becomes a liability? So in this case, the West's need for the Israeli occupation entity will naturally reduce incrementally within the rule of the continuity of policies with time. The way that capitalism survives is that it rejuvenates itself, it regenerates, right? So even if we look at the policy of colonialism, it went from hard colonialism, where it occupied regions of strategic importance on the ground post 1948, to shifting more towards economic colonialism when the liberation operations happened on the ground in places like Algeria, for example, in North Africa and in West Asia. So the Israeli occupation entity is really that last colonizing entity that is standing on the ground, and no doubt it will cease to exist with the passage of time. So the entity will naturally shrink to match its true size that reflects its actual capabilities, and this will happen through the supposed two-state solution that America wants to put forward. The reason I say supposed two-state solution is because when America talks about a two-state solution, it's not like it's talking about giving Palestinians inherent sovereignty or giving them the inherent ability to rule themselves. No, it's putting a Western-friendly entity in power. It's removing their defense capabilities. Just think of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. They're basically lapdogs for the Israeli occupation entity. They hunt down Palestinians on the ground and kill them. So naturally, politics runs on power and ability. The weak has no place in the world of politics. And we have to understand that the West is not inherently pro-Zionist. In 1948, when the Israeli occupation entity was established, America, or if we want to say the imperial core, because it was Britain back then, and then that power transfer was handed over to America. So the imperial core, through the UN, this newly created entity, they only gave the Israeli occupation entity, 55% of the land. If it was Israel that was controlling the imperial core, then they would have given them the land from the Nile to the Euphrates, for example. The post-1967 borders would have been acknowledged internationally. But for example, we see that through the UN, these resolutions have all piled, but they've been put on the shelf. For example, like Palestinians have the right to return, or the occupation of Gaza is illegal, or the occupation of West Bank is illegal. The reason that they haven't been actualized is because there was no real active resistance on the ground that was confronting the Israeli occupation entity. But post October the 7th, what has happened is America has been forced to now actualize two-state solution and forced to reckon with the power balance on the ground. Because what happens if you continue to agitate these resistance forces in the region that are growing? You are ultimately shooting your own self in the foot. So what has sanctioning, for example, Iran for the past 4 decades gotten America? Absolutely nowhere. The 8-year war failed. 4 decades of economic terrorism has failed. Iran is stronger than ever. And likewise, the resistance axis is only growing stronger and stronger. So to continue to work against it and against the will of the people of the region with time is only sinking the American ship and making it weaker and weaker. And we have to remember that America even turned against its own policies for the region. So for example, if we talk about, the quote unquote new Middle East project directing its own strategic presence in the region through the invasion of Iraq, through the invasion of Afghanistan. It ended up withdrawing its presence from those areas of strategic importance, because ultimately that $1 trillion project, that $6 trillion project, failed. So even America's own strategies in the region, it has had to forego with time as a result of their failure. So we have to understand that politics runs on power and ability, but this will reduce incrementally. The support for the Israeli occupation entity will reduce incrementally, ultimately, because the failure has no place in the world of politics. And the kind of position that America is in over here is, we have to understand, America wants to defeat the Gazan resistance more than the Israeli occupation entity wants. But the fury that America has with the occupation entity is that it has achieved nothing but killed civilians. They're telling them, at least kill a resistance leader in Gaza. At least know where the tunnels are and destroy a few tunnels. At least achieve something of strategic importance. At least ground invade and consolidate your presence. At least kill a hefty number of fighters. You haven't managed to achieve anything. Gaza, which is 365 square kilometers, you have not managed to gain anything from it. So what is to be made of this entity? Post-war, the victors of the war are the ones that determine the rules of engagement moving forward. Now, in terms of Netanyahu's strategy, or the strategy of the Israeli occupation entity, they have made it very, very clear, and this is where they fundamentally, primarily differ with America, is that America wants this political settlement. America sees the political settlement as the best way for consolidating its strategic interests in this region. America wants, quote unquote, stability, right? This notion of war is like the worst thing that could be for America right now. It wants stability. But Netanyahu's right-wing government completely rejects the American political settlement. They completely reject the notion of a two-state solution. They see it as a recipe for another war. If the Gazan resistance managed to carry out on October the 7th, without a Palestinian state, what will happen when there's a Palestinian state? Perhaps the Gazan resistance will finish them once and for all. So the Israeli occupation entity, it doesn't accept the two-state solution. It cannot accept a one-state solution. It cannot reoccupy Gaza because it hasn't achieved anything on the ground. So the only thing that the Israeli occupation entity can do is attempt to finish the Gazan resistance, to finish the population of Gaza, It is to completely depopulate them. This is the vision that they have: create the most uninhabitable conditions for the people of Gaza, such that the people of Gaza themselves will want to flee. But we have to understand that this won't happen for one reason and only, due to the fortitude and the steadfastness of the Gazan resistance. And we also need to reiterate that the American two-state solution will be a complete failure, because the Gazan resistance has not been weakened, and it is predicated on the weakening of the Gazan resistance. Now, another reason that Netanyahu seeks to prolong this war is obviously the personal crisis that he faces. He will be removed from power, and he's likely convicted, and he knows that ultimately. He is just an expired card for America. But given that America is on board with this ceasefire, and we have to reiterate that America is on board with a permanent ceasefire. It does not want a permanent ceasefire because it wants to continue to blackmail the Gazan resistance, but it wants a non-permanent ceasefire so that the kind of bombardment that the Israeli occupation entity is doing to the people of Gaza will simmer down, so that US interests are not affected globally, and at the same time they are doing strategic security hits on the Gazan resistance that America sees as weakening the Gazan resistance, because that's their top priority. So given that America is on board with the ceasefire, it's likely they will pressure the Israeli occupation entity to go in this direction with time. But given the fact that this war is still continuing, it means that it's not a red line for America to stop this war. America is happy with this war continuing, but with the passage of time, it's likely to go in that direction. America's main concern is with this genocide not increasing beyond a certain boundary that warrants an escalation regionally and further worldwide uprising. And within this context, we have to see the Rafah invasion. So America just wants a controlled genocide. At the same time, it wants the Israeli occupation to weaken the Gazan resistance. But as we've just mentioned, they have not achieved a single military strategic objective yet.
Thank you, Sister Batool. So Sakina, what are your thoughts, whatever Sister Batool has shared? Because they haven't achieved any kind of strategic interest, military interest especially. They couldn't finish Hamas. They couldn't achieve anything they wanted to achieve out of this war, especially in Gaza and now in Rafah. So, when we look at different people as well, we see like Senator Lindsey Graham has given a statement recently. You might have come across to that as well, in which he was discussing this situation in Gaza and Rafah. So he was like trying to say like Israel should do whatever he wants and whatever it takes to like become safe or whatever. And he compared it to Hiroshima and Nagasaki bomb attacks, even though it was it might be his personal view. And he was like saying they should be given, for instance, bomb to finish this whole thing. So what do you think these kind of provocative people who are like just fueling this kind of hatred and this kind of this kind of you can say a thought or opinion. So what do you think, what difference do you see in US and American policy as well? And this statement of Lindsay, how do you see on this, how do you see this statement, and how do you see the difference between US and UK policy? Because UK said like we will not like pause our weapon shipment. We just have 1% of dealing of like weapon with Israel, so it doesn't have to do anything with that. So how you see UK reaction and the US? And as Sister Batool mentioned, and through its discussion, what I understood is they use Zionism as their as a tool, but this is colonial imperial agenda to create a state of Israel, to hide behind a curtain, to reach their own personal, for example, goal, imperialist goal or colonial goals they had like 75 years ago or 80 years ago or whatever time you can say. So how do you see people are awakening as well, and how do you see the difference between the policy in UK and US, and what are your thoughts on this statement on of the Senator Lindsay?
So I think, on one hand, the difference between the two countries is that on one hand, you have seen a sort of a red line, from President Biden. However, UK has made it very clear that there is no red line for the UK, and therefore they're not going to stop selling arms. And this is the statement they have issued. However, um, in reality, I think it's just, for me, it comes back to the same thing. I think they are just pandering to the politics of their own nations. Um, if you look at the United States also, I think they obviously play a more role in supporting Israel than UK has done. If you can look at, for example, the United Nations and all the votes that happened, um, United Kingdom has abstained in most of those votes, whereas the United States has been responsible for vetoing anything that was pro-Palestinian. So I don't think that there is any one that is better than the other. Of course, the British were the ones who created Israel in the first place. We can never forget that. So I think it's just pandering to their own people to look at where the chips are. Now, both countries, as we know, are going to elections this year. Here in the UK also, we'll be looking at the elections. So there is, I think they are trying to probably speak on that. In terms of uh, Israel and its dying force, people like Lindsay, like this is like Sister Batul mentioned, Israel is a dying horse. And when
Hmm.
it is a dying horse, you will see that, they start now hitting left, right, and center because they are struggling. They just want, they are full of rage and they just want to make something happen. And this is like, any person who's gone crazy, you can see that they will start lashing out in all different manners. And I think this, I wouldn't put too much emphasis in his statements, because this is a typical Zionist response, and that's because they know they are losing the war, and they're just lashing out. Um, there used to be all this image around the world that Israel was invincible, that there was this iron dome that protected it, and that, we used to get so scared whenever we thought about the IOF or the Israeli, defense. Where is this defense? I mean, with one show, Iran has shown what it can do. And it is very interesting because uh, Iran literally gave notice to the entire world, knowing that they were going to intercept, all the drones. They used some of their most outdated drones. So they wanted to get rid of them. The amount of money that it cost for them to launch those drones is literally peanuts compared to the defense that had to capture those drones. So I think with that one action of Iran, they have destroyed the whole concept of the fact that this is an invincible state. If tomorrow they really wanted to destroy it, they would not give the notice, and they have a lot stronger weaponry than what they have used. When we talk about Hamas are not people. Hamas is an ideology. It's a resistance ideology. You cannot kill that. You might be able to kill people up to the very last person, in Palestine is resistant at the moment. And if at all, you were worried about Hamas before, then now you should be worried even more, because there was some support for Hamas. But today, every child, every woman, every man has suffered the pain of loss, and therefore all of them have become Hamas. So, removing Hamas is just wishful thinking. It's never going to go away. It's an ideology. Any country, any group of people who are occupied, who are oppressed, will resist. That is a natural aspect of a human resistance. You're not going to, if today somebody was to come and try to take away your home, you're not going to be saying, okay, fine, take the rest of it, I'm just going to retain one home. You will resist. That is the nature of a human being. So I don't think that they have achieved anything. I don't think that they're going to be achieving anything. And I agree with Sister Batool that I don't think any of them are serious about a two-state solution. Two-state solution is again just a facade, whereby Israel will control everything. They control the water, they control the borders, they control electricity. So in essence, two-state solution is just one state, which is Israel, with a few fringe Palestinians living in an open air prison, as they have been doing in Gaza. Um, the solution really for Israel is for the world to come together. And the way apartheid was destroyed in South Africa, in the same manner, this is what we have to fight for. We don't need two-state solution. We need one state solution, a state that will everybody can live peacefully, everybody can be treated equally. So I really see that there isn't much that is happening on any of the fronts in terms of the leaders, or whether it's Israel, whether it's America, it's the UK. However, I really have hope in the people, and especially the young people. I mean, I think, despite the black cloud that exists around the world, as we watch daily a live genocide on our phones, despite that, I think I still am very hopeful, because when I look at the young people, when I look at their ability to understand issues, when I look at their ability to put themselves in danger. You can look at these students in America, how they are being treated by the police over there. They have so much to lose. These are the students who have paid hefty tuition fees. It's not like the UK, where there is a grant. These students pay a lot of money, and they are ready to they are completely ready to give up all of that for justice. These young people really give hope for a better future tomorrow. And usually when we talk about the signs of the coming of our imam, I think these are signs. I do worry, though. My biggest worry is for us as the ummah, as the Muslim ummah, because Allah tells us in the Quran that if we are not steadfast, He will replace us with another people. I see people who are not Muslims. I see people who are not even religious, but they have justice in their hearts. They believe in being honest and truthful, and they believe in the cause of humanity. And I think that they might replace an ummah at one point. This is the preparation for the army of Imam Mahdi.
Inshallah, I mean, thank you, Sister Sakina. So, what are your thoughts, Sister Batul? What Sister Sakina has said? If you want to add something to that as well, because apparently it looks like U.S., UK, and Israel are in a cave, and they don't know how to come out of it. They don't have any solution to that, apparently, except like by killing the people at large, or putting like leveling down the whole city or country, and throwing them out of their homes, and making them refugees, and trying to send them in different countries as a on humanitarian grounds, doesn't make them superheroes of this world, or they won't be. I don't think so. Oppression can live forever. Obviously it has to go to an end, and we it might be the beginning of their end in that context. So what are your thoughts? Because apparently if we see different statements from the different people, like if you talk about Blinken, he said they are unable to defeat Hamas, obviously, and moving forward and killing the people would bring anarchy and all that. So we know, apparently they do understand what is happening. And so where do you see the situation going on to, and how they I mean, from their perspective, maybe what do you think what they would do to come out of this situation, and achieve something? Because apparently they haven't achieved anything except it's the word awakening, and they are standing against them. So how do you see this aspect, as well as the other aspect of humanitarian crisis going on now, before in Gaza and now in Rafah as well? People are really, really in a dangerous situation living, and people don't have children don't have parents, and they don't have food, and they don't have there's so much misery as well. And even I was looking at the video of some family, like there was a young child with some special siblings, and she was alone. Her parents were not there alive anymore, and her siblings were they have tied them with the rope in the house with a window, just to keep them safe and all that. So I mean, a situation is extremely painful if we look at the situation from a humanitarian perspective. So what do you think, what is really supposed to be done by the people who are watching you, and people who are working towards peace? And sister talked about the ummah as well. So obviously, apparently it looks like ummah has died ages ago. We are seeing people dying in Gaza, but I feel they are alive and we are dead people. So what do you think the role of Muslim Ummah still can play, if they happen to be alive, if they happen to be awakened in any manner? Do you think we can wake them up after all everything which is going on, or it's not going to happen?
Right. So I think the first point that I'll make very quickly is that America and the Israeli occupation entity have the exact same objective. They want to defeat the Gazan resistance. Where they differ, though, primarily, is on how to achieve that. As we mentioned, the Israeli occupation entity, its solution is to completely get rid of the people of Gaza altogether, because it has no plan. That is the point. It completely rejects the American plan that is being laid forward and the American vision, because from the Israeli occupation entity's perspective, and, their ministers have made that very, very clear, they've discussed fully reoccupying Gaza in their delusion. They've discussed, resettling in Gaza, after they were forced to unilaterally withdraw after the Second Intifada and its culmination in 2005. But obviously, how can you recapture an area when you cannot ground invade? And suppose they do, ground invade Rafah, and maintain temporary control over the border crossings, that's not stable control. We're already seeing, in terms of the numbers, before yesterday, over 50 Israeli soldiers between killed and injured. It's absolutely not sustainable, as we're discussing. 8 months in, or 7.5 months in, and the resistance are still firing rockets from places like Jabalia in the north. That is seen as nothing short of a miracle. Where are these weapons still coming in from? So we have to understand that the American strategy and the American vision is foundationally different to that of the Israeli occupation entity. And Blinken made this very clear during the G7 summit in November. He said, there will be no use of Gaza as a platform for terrorism, which means we want to defeat the Gazan resistance. There will be no reoccupation of Gaza after the conflict. There will be no attempt to blockade or besiege Gaza. There'll be no reduction in territory of Gaza, and there'll be no forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, not now, not after the war. So obviously he's responding to the plans that are being put forth by the occupation entity of reoccupying Gaza and settling in it. But he also made it clear that even to besiege Gaza is not a choice. Why? That is the decisive point between pre and post October the 7th. There is no return back to the status quo before that, because Americans are aware that Gaza is now, or Gaza has proved ultimately through the operation in October the 7th to be a ticking time bomb. To continue besieging the Strip, if you did not dismantle the Gazan resistance, will lead to that resistance intensifying. And so the West themselves have come to the inevitable reality of besieging the Palestinians. It will lead to resistance, seeking to uproot the occupiers. And the way that America sees it is that without a Palestinian state, there will be more October the 7th, and this is seen as dangerous to America. Obviously, this is within their delusion, because the resistance will continue until full liberation. But the way that America sees it is that at least if we give Palestinians, some land, or officially acknowledge that we're giving Palestinians some land, Palestinians might do away with those crumbs. Palestinians, they bet on the fact that Palestinians are probably so sick of the death and the destruction that they'll say, yeah, we accept the prospect of having a state of our own. And of course, as we've mentioned, this state is completely stripped of Palestinian sovereignty. It will be like the Palestinian Authority. And so what needs to be also emphasized is that without the operation of October the 7th and what ensued after that, the idea of a two-state solution would have never been considered seriously, because obviously America was even going in the direction of the quote-unquote Abraham Accords, the deal of the century that Trump brokered. Under the deal of the century, the idea was to completely dissolve the idea of a Palestinian state. All those land annexations, like the Golan Heights, for example, that is considered illegal under international law, would be considered legal under the quote-unquote deal of the century. So we have to understand that there's really a fundamental difference in how to bring about the weakening of the Gazan resistance. America sees that through ultimately striking on the Gazan resistance by bringing into power an entity that is Western friendly. In that way, all of the interests of the people of Gaza will be absorbed by this entity, and they bet on the fact that the people of Gaza are so sick of the death and the destruction that they'll be happy from that. And now when we talk about this relationship dynamic, it will be more evident and obvious post-war, the Israeli occupation entity and America, because the West cannot in the long run rely on a fragile entity to achieve its interests. Abandoning the Israeli occupation entity, when I say abandon, I mean with time, incrementally reducing its support for this entity, is the more effective option, because it's become a liability and it's become a burden. So we have to understand that the Israeli occupation entity only seemed strong for the longest time because there was no real force confronting it. Post 1979, when the Islamic Revolution came into power, that is when you had forces from nations in the region that have formed that do not accept the imposed hegemonic humiliation. It was the policy of hegemony and working to monopolize these forces that led to them cohesing in the first place. Lebanon, Syria, now recently you've had Iraq and obviously Yemen. So, for example, the creation of Daesh only led to the retaliation of Hashd al-Sha'bi. The Israeli occupation entity, occupying South Lebanon only led to the formation of the resistance there. So the whole matter of the West right now standing in support of the Israeli occupation entity is that it is their own project. They initiated this project. America's so directly involved right now because in this war, that it's managing this war, because America wants to manage the next steps. It wants to oversee the next steps, even if that means the disintegration of the Israeli occupation entity at the hands of the resistance forces, which is what we are currently seeing right now. We're seeing the Israeli occupation entity on every single metric disintegrate. So the shrinking of the Israeli occupation entity through the liberation of occupied territories with time, the American strategy is to basically reduce its support for this occupation entity, as opposed to allowing the balance of powers to tilt at the hands of the resistance. Because what happens if America is outside of the picture? Or what happens if America keeps supporting the Israeli occupation entity and the resistance keeps inflicting harm on it, to the point where the Israeli occupation entity will cease to exist? The resistance will just sit in their place. So America does not want to allow the power balance to tilt and shift at the hands of the resistance. If they could announce the bankruptcy of their own project, which is the Israeli occupation entity, and replace it with another substitute, find another substitute for it, they would rather do that than allow the resistance to win. So even the American strategy with the resistance axis has been one of compromise, and America will be forced to compromise with entities like Iran, for example, through the nuclear deal moving forward, because they cannot deny the power balance on the ground. If you deny the power balance on the ground, you are denying the reality of events. You are shooting yourself in the foot. Further, if America decides that it doesn't want to compromise with the resistance forces in the region that have become so strong that they are basically the captains of the ship, then even America, forget the Israeli occupation entity, it's irrelevant in this matter. America's presence in the region will wholeheartedly shrink. And just in one quick minute, in terms of the Muslim Ummah, no doubt the collective consciousness of the world is rising. What Gaza's blood has done is nothing short of a miracle on every single level. You're seeing people talk about blocking celebrities online, for example. There's a whole worldwide mass shift from the delusion that we've been fed from the soft war campaigns of the West, whether that's through the entertainment industry, through numbing the masses from issues that don't matter. So many, even, non-Muslims have come to learn about Islam through the steadfastness and the resolve of the people of Gaza, let alone Muslims who have strengthened their iman. So we are the majority right now. And this is a very important point. We are the majority. The majority of the world are Palestinians. So really, there is no place for fear. And I think even when you're seeing with the mass students, over 2,000 to 3,000 students have so far been arrested in America alone. The majority of people are tending in that direction, where they're willing to sacrifice their own liberty and their own jobs and their own sense of security for the sake of standing up for what is right. So we are the majority, so there is no place for fear. And those who are not speaking up, or those who are not active out of fear, in reality, they are the ones that are being left behind.
Thank you so much, Sister Batool. Thank you so much, Sister Sakina. I wanted to take your view on that as well, but the time is really finished. They have to move on to the next show. So I really apologize. I do apologize for that. But I'm really grateful for both of you to be on my show and sharing your views on the important issue. Thanks a lot for that. And to the viewers, I would just say, like Sister Batool and Sister Sakina said, we all need to stand up together, and we all need to talk about Palestine. We need to understand the situation, and we need to stand up for justice and truth. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Allah Hafiz.